Welcome to the DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023 podcast series brought to you by the Digital Lenders Association of India and India Fintech Diaries. In today's episode, we discuss data protection and privacy and what the recent and the impending regulations in this space mean for fintech. To discuss this, we have with us Supratim Chakraborty, partner at Khaitan Co. Supratim leads the privacy and data protection practice of Khaitan Co, a premier Indian law firm. He is considered a thought leader in this space and has advised eminent plans in relation to information technology laws in India, including on data privacy, cybersecurity, and internet intermediaries related issues. Supratim is very active in the technology related policy space as well. He was amongst the select few individuals in the country from whom the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology had specifically sought additional comments on aspects pertaining to the erstwhile draft personal data protection. Also joining us is Prashanth Ramdas, also a partner at Khaitan Co. He is a partner in the financial, regulatory, and banking and finance practice groups in the Bengaluru office of Khaitan Co. He advises a variety of fintech clients engaged in digital lending, payments, wealth tech, insurtech, as well as cryptocurrency and digital assets. He specializes in financial and regulatory advisory, including providing strategic and regulatory advice on India entry, obtaining regulatory licenses approvals, liaising with regulators, and analyzing new fintech product structures and operational processes from a financial, regulatory, and compliance perspective. I'm your host, Elroy Saram, and this is India Fintech Diaries. Welcome back to India Fintech Diaries, a show where we discuss all things Indian fintech. Continuing our series with the Digital Lenders Association of India, today we turn our focus to data protection and security. With rising digital adoption in India, data protection and security have taken center stage and become a boardroom agenda for every financial services firm. And to help us make sense of the labyrinth of data protection and security laws and regulations that we have with us today, we have Supratim Chakraborty and Prashanth Ramdas, partners at Khaitan Co. Welcome to the show, Supratim and Prashanth.
Thank you. Thanks, Elroy.
Thanks, Elroy.
To begin off, let's do a quick round of introductions, Supratim and Prashanth. For the sake of our listeners, maybe you could quickly give an overview of your backgrounds. Maybe Supratim, you can go first.
Right. Thanks, Elroy. So I am a corporate commercial partner at Khaitan Company, had been doing mergers and acquisitions. Right from my student days, I was very interested in technology and data. And, that is where, I started this as a proper practice along with my M&A and corporate practice. And the interest grew. And now, we have been working not only in the general space of data privacy and protection, but also in the digital lending space, quite focused manner.
So I'm a partner from the Bangalore office at Khaitan, and I focus on financial regulatory practice and debt financing. We advise a lot of fintech clients engaged in digital lending, payments, wealth tech, insurtech, as well as crypto and virtual digital assets. And then we kind of focus on financial regulatory advisory and providing specific kind of advice on product structuring, India entry, licensing, and data as well. Fintech has been a growing sector over the last few years, and we kind of it's an exacting time for us to kind of be involved in this space and analyze various business models and advise clients on regulatory compliance aspects.
Supratim, we keep hearing different words like data protection, privacy, security, etc. And many of them end up being used very interchangeably. But I'm sure from a legal standpoint, the specific meanings of these words are somewhat different. Is there a framework that our listeners can use to think about data protection and security?
Right. Excellent question, Elroy. Let me give a simple example, probably. And that is a very laymanish example that I'm going to provide. So that not only, people who are technically sound, but otherwise also everyone on the floor can understand. When we look into a room which has got, say, a glass door or a glass window, and you can see what is there inside, that'll be probably a breach of your privacy. But if you can break that glass door or glass window and get into the room, that'll be breach of your protection. I hope I've been able to simply explain that here.
Prashanth, RBI has been very proactive when it comes to data protection and security with regulations such as data localization, tokenization, e-mandate for recurring transactions, and digital lending guidelines. Help us understand the implications of these for fintech, especially the recent digital lending guidelines that came out.
Yeah, so I think RBI has been very, very protective of the data, financial data, and payments data of Indian
Right.
citizens, right from 2018 when the payments data localization circular had come out. Even though there was widespread lobbying with the RBI to kind of relax the strict requirements of data localization, RBI has always, maintained its stance that there are a lot of instances of data leaks, where Indian citizens' payments data, card data, etc., is at risk. So RBI specifically wanted to ensure that whatever data breach incidents occur, they have kind of the visibility to kind of investigate, those issues within the territory of India. And hence, for sensitive data, RBI has always been clear that all the data must only reside in India. And then that's obviously from the perspective of protecting the data of the citizens of India, and ensuring that as a regulator, we kind of give very not too much leeway for
Right.
for any risk to that data. From a digital lending perspective, I think the working group which the RBI had set up to kind of study the digital lending industry had kind of unequivocally kind of mentioned in its report about the various practices which fintech companies were adopting, while collecting customer data to underwrite and then provide loans to customers. And generally, the theme of the working group report was that while India obviously had its minimum data protection regulations under the IT Act, etc., the working group had specifically highlighted how fintech companies, collect all sorts of data from customers, even if it is not really required for them to provide the financial services which they were saying they would provide. And also instances where the data was being misused, especially in the context of, recovery and collection processes where customers were kind of being harassed using, phone data, etc. So obviously, I think the working group had recommended to the RBI that a separate set of data protection norms should apply for the financial services and digital lending industry, given the higher risk in terms of misuse of the data, which would affect the larger customer base, right? So I think the RBI in its current kind of digital lending guidelines has gone into specifically the data protection and information security framework, which digital lending applications and lenders who lend to or through these digital lending platforms must maintain. And they've kind of been again fairly strict to ensure that the consent based framework and only need to know basis data is collected, and mobile phone data etc is not collected on an ongoing basis.
I just wanted to add in, I just wanted to throw some light from an overall perspective of data localization, as Prashanth was mentioning. There are a couple of theories which are generally sort of thought of when you look at localization.
Right.
One is the trade theory, which is basically my data, my oil, and I want to use it the way I want to. The other one is the security theory, which is safety of the data, and the data, the relevant information should be available to our law enforcement authorities, etc., whenever they are required, things like those. So if you look at it presently in the Indian context, it's the latter. And in sector specific areas like the Reserve Bank of India giving its diktat for data localization, it's very clear that they want this data to be more secure. Okay. And that is probably what is being playing in their minds. Interestingly, the twist is with this new digital personal data protection bill, where they are talking about whitelisting of certain jurisdictions and stating that the data can freely go to such jurisdictions which are whitelisted by the government. We'll have to see how this plays out, but I happen to speak with the relevant ministry, and a very interesting note came through when they say that, listen, today, sector specific regulators are stating what they have to state in the absence of a specific regulation, which is the mother umbrella legislation on data protection. But
Right.
once this mother umbrella legislation is ready, probably we will take a stock holistically as to which all regulator has authority to state what in relation to data privacy and protection. My personal take is that the authority of regulators such as Reserve Bank of India would continue, and they would give the specifics. But the overarching principles would be set to a particular standard through a general legislation like the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill.
When you said whitelisting, Supratim, is this very similar to the provisions under GDPR, specifically with regard to the EU and the US?
Yeah, so now this is a very interesting question. When you look at GDPR, there are things like standard contractual clauses, you'll have BCRs and
Right,
things like
right,
those. So,
right.
so that it is presently not enunciated in that manner in the present version of the bill. Of course, the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill is a principles based draft right now, and they have called out certain thumb rules. The specifics are to be further enunciated through rules or otherwise. But I personally believe that probably some more granularity should be brought in this bill itself in the context of cross-border data transfer. For example, you can have whitelisted jurisdictions, but what happens to students who are going to study abroad? Will
Right.
they choose only those jurisdictions which are whitelisted? Tourists, for example. Will they only go to the whitelisted jurisdiction? The answer is no. So probably it's about time that we also understand those additional requirements that would be there and bring that on along with the whitelisting concept that is there today.
Supratim, just to give us listeners a sense of the key provisions of the draft data protection bill, maybe you could quickly give us like a 30,000 feet view of
Yeah.
some of the key highlights of that bill.
Right. So I think succinctly curated draft, it is largely principles based, like I was mentioning. It
Right.
covers only digital personal data. So no physical data is covered under the purview of this bill. Also, no non-personal data. Thankfully, I think some of the earlier versions, there was a thought process that non-personal data would also be covered, not there in this particular bill. It is again thought to be largely business friendly, whilst there is an attempt to protect the personal data of individuals. Of course, there are certain tweaks and refinements required for which I'm sure players have already given their inputs or feedback. There's a criticism on a lot of delegated legislation being there, but probably that is by design, because if you have to keep it light, then a lot of it would go in the rule making where the specifics would be called. I'm not getting into the other criticism of government exemptions, etc. Also, there are certain very interesting nuances which are being sort of brought about through this bill, like the classification of data controller, which are called data fiduciaries, into
Right.
data fiduciary and significant data fiduciary. So there is enough amount of data crunching, etc. They could be categorized as a higher threshold data controller called significant data fiduciary. And they will have additional obligations. There's also a very interesting concept of deemed consent, okay, which has been,
Right.
I think, in the news for and probably in the negative sense. But if you ask me honestly, consent is just one ground of processing. You would need other grounds of processing as well. Let me give you a simple example. When we have employee investigation today, if you read the black letter of the law under the IT Act and the sensitive personal data rules, you will actually have to go to that individual employee and take consent that I'm going to look into the laptop. If there is any sensitive personal data, we might access whatever, all of those. So, but that is in a bad day, a very, very bad choice to have, right? And therefore, there are other grounds required. For one of them could be employment. Okay, in
Right.
an emergency situation where you have to take a patient to say an OT, you would not be taking consent that time. So it's very clear that there are other grounds required, and that has been enunciated through the concept of deemed consent. Okay. And the other important aspects which I would like to talk about is there is no categorization of personal data into sensitive personal data or critical personal data. Like also we mentioned, there is no data localization, so to say, but the way it has been mentioned is that transfer of personal data could take place to pre-approved or whitelisted jurisdictions. There is no criminal sanction, thankfully, but there are very high financial penalties. It can go up to 500 crores and Indian rupee, which could be quite significant. But there is a grade provided where basically, depending on certain criteria, you reach that high number. there is no materiality based threshold which has been provided for data breach report, which I think is a bit of a negative, because then any and every kind of data breach would be required to be reported to the data protection board and also to the data principals. Okay. There is
Okay.
a mention about handling of children's personal data. As you know, in the Indian construct, the age of consent is 18 years. And it has been told that there is no targeted advertisement possible or tracking or monitoring of children, etc., which is a bit of a negative for certain industries, and some fine tuning has been requested, I'm aware, by such players. There's very some positives also, I think, like alternate dispute resolution has been specifically called out in the a voluntary undertaking can be taken from certain players, and not everything needs to go up to litigation and right up to the final stage of appeal. And one final thing is data subjects or data principals, as they are called under the bill, not only have rights like under GDPR, etc., they also have certain duties. And if they falter, there could be penalty of rupees 10,000.
That's some really interesting points that you brought up, Supratim. And that actually brings me to the next question I had. Khaitan and Co, which is your firm that you represent, and DLAI also launched a white paper titled Interplay Between Data Protection and Lending at the recently concluded DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023. Prashant, this question is for you. Can you take us through the highlights of this white paper?
Sure, Roy. So I think the white paper was something which we had conceptualized along with the knowledge committee members of DLAI.
Right.
And given that the data protection bill also came only a few months ago, and the digital lending guidelines also recently introduced, we thought we will kind of do an in-depth study of how this is really affecting the digital lending industry and the fintechs operating in this industry. And what we have tried to kind of do is to kind of look into the the historical growth of the industry, look into how the government has kind of encouraged the digital delivery of financial services through India Stack, and through the concept of paperless, presenceless delivery of financial services, which has really boosted the entire industry and provided a great platform for fintechs to innovate and provide digital services through this. And we've kind of looked into how data is a critical kind of tool in the overall process, given that a lot of this is kind of geared towards providing services to the given the demographic dividend in India, and
Right.
given the increasing kind of smartphone usage, internet consumption in India. There is so much unserved sector where financial inclusion will play a key role going forward. So we've kind of discussed these aspects and then really called out for a requirement to have a uniform framework for treating financial data in India, because currently, obviously, the new bill is something which is proposed, and RBI as a sectoral regulator, has also kind of legislated and come out with circulars which talk about how certain types of data must be treated. So end of the day, we've spoken about how there is a need for some broad guardrails which the industry has to adopt with respect to processing of financial data, and keep the parameters which kind of are relevant in that sense, and how there are various inconsistencies, say, even between the data protection bill and the digital lending guidelines, which ultimately would lead to more ambiguities in understanding and implementing the regulatory framework. And hence there is a clear need for us to kind of harmonize the various data related legislations and have a uniform set of guidelines which would help provide a best in class data processing framework for the industry as a
Right.
whole, given that data is a key tool for lenders to underwrite customers and essentially grow in the coming years, right?
Yeah.
So given the goals of financial inclusion which RBI has clearly outlined, it's important that for financial data there should be a single data protection framework governing financial data, which can actually kind of trigger the next phase of growth in the industry, and help India achieve its financial inclusion goals.
Interesting thoughts there, Prashant, and that looks like a very interesting white paper to read. I have a final parting thought for each of you, right? Considering that the increasing focus of the government and regulators has been on data protection and security of late, what is the approach that fintech should take from a principles based or a framework based approach to ensure compliance? Maybe each of you could share your views on this, on the approach that fintechs should start considering.
Right, right. Yeah, so I was essentially saying that, obviously, in the industry, you have different types of entities operating in the fintech space. Those industry players who are directly licensed with the RBI must obviously be more careful in terms of compliance, given that, they are subject to the direct regulatory supervision of the RBI. And RBI has now also specifically come out with various requirements relating to data collection, processing, storage, right? So, for example, in the digital lending context, RBI has been very clear that you have to get explicit consent of the customers before collecting their data, and you have to be fully transparent at each stage when you collect the data as to why you're using the data. RBI has also restricted access to mobile phone resources of customers, except for one time at the onboarding stage to kind of complete your KYC verification process. I think all these stipulations are, while the RBI has obviously kind of come out with it at the backdrop of the working group report on digital lending. These are requirements which should be strictly complied with. Given that the RBI would kind of look at compliance aspects, and you should be in a position to demonstrate compliance by having a clear audit trail to show and demonstrate that you are compliant both in letter and spirit. So with respect to again the treatment and the interplay between how regulated entities and other unregulated players work together and operate in the industry, given that obviously access to capital is available only with the regulated lenders, but there is a large group of unregulated fintech players who kind of drive innovation and growth in the industry and have access to the consumer base and provide innovative platforms with user interface which helps consumers access the various financial services. So those unregulated fintech players, must also kind of look at, what are the stipulations under their contractual arrangements with regulated entities to ensure that they are in a position to comply with the requirements which the regulated counterparts impose on them, so as to ensure that their terms operational processes, the various platforms which they operate are compliant with the requirements which the RBI has brought out, because eventually the regulated players will pass on the compliance obligations or to the unregulated platforms, and it's crucial for them to also kind of be ahead of the curve and ensure full compliance. In terms of the data protection bill itself, I think we've had this discussion earlier as well, because I think, Supro, this is the fourth version of the bill which has come out, and at each version which comes out, clients do ask us, what do we need to do right now to be ahead of the curve and comply with what is going to come out. And at each time, I think the bill is getting revised and changed. So I'm not sure whether clients generally should look at changing their current kind of model, or implementing at least internal processes to monitor and set up compliance in the anticipation that the bill will be passed into law in the coming months.
Right. I think excellent point, Prashant. I'll take it on from there. And let me give a little more broad brushed approach to the question. Okay. The global gold standards, to my mind, have already been etched, okay, through GDPR, etc. So, whatever we are talking about through various iterations of the bill and what is coming up, plus what the sector regulator like the Reserve Bank of India is talking about, is not very different from, say, a GDPR standard. So my suggestion would be that if you would really want to be ahead of the curve and not be too worried about what is changing every day, as in with or without the new bill, it would be the global gold standards which are already there. Okay. And that is in relation to privacy notice, the evidence in relation to consent that is being taken, etc., etc. All these are pretty much standard globally by. Now, let us talk about a bit of a delta which has been created by this new bill. And I'm going to tell you in a manner where you'll realize that it is nothing where, which you should not be doing even otherwise. Okay. Evidence to be kept for consent and notices. It has been called out in the bill, because in a bad day, you'll have to actually produce evidence to show that you'd actually given notice or taken consent. Similarly, a mechanism to say I accept and I decline in the same manner. It cannot be so that I accept appears right on top, and your right to withdraw or decline is lost somewhere where someone cannot find it out. It's pretty standard.
Yep.
Right. Then the other thing is, data principles right, like right of erasure, or give effect to all other rights of a data principle or or a data subject. That should anyways be clearly available. You need to have valid contracts between data controller and a co-data controller, a data controller and data processor. All these are pretty much standard by. Let me talk about few of these standard items which you probably could start looking into. One of them is a data protection officer. You can call that person by any other name today. But if under the bill, if you are categorized as a significant data fiduciary in future, probably you need to have that data protection officer who takes care of the requirements pertaining to data. Again, I don't think it is a massive requirement or something that you would not be able to have from within your office. An absolute different item, which probably is not there today, but you need to start looking into in a very intense manner, is the requirement to translate your privacy notices and consents in all the languages that are given in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Now, this is a new requirement which I think is a very favorite one for the government. We have tried to see if this can be diluted, made optional, etc., but probably that is not going to happen. So one can start looking into converting all of the notices and consents slowly into other languages that are specified in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. That could come in handy very soon when this particular digital personal data protection bill actually becomes a law.
Very interesting thoughts. It was great speaking with you both, Supratim and Prashanth. Thanks a ton for joining us today. It was a pleasure hosting you on the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Our pleasure.
Thanks, Alroy. Thank you.
Just a quick parting question to both of you. In case any of our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do this?
Right. So we are available on our email IDs. It'll be supratim.chakraborty@khaitanco.com. And for Prashanth, would be prashanth.ramdas@khaitanco.com. And anyways, you can connect with us over LinkedIn.
Excellent. I'll include those details in the show notes. That's it from India Fintech Diaries this week. Stay tuned, as in our upcoming episode, we'll give you a summary of what transpired at the recent DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023. And until next time, stay safe.